we have already had the chance of playing Granblue Fantasy Relink. And I have to say that I'm just so thrilled that this is going to be kind of the beginning of gaming in 2024. Initially, I made a video about this game stating that this would be something that would quench the thirst that we have for a new Monster Hunter game. And I know back then, while I was watching all those gameplays, while I was watching the previews, discussions, and everything that was floating around the game, I knew that it was something that it would fit in the whole of being something like a mixture between an MMO and also a Monster Hunter game. I know that a lot of people out there in the comment section for that video were like, yeah, if you're expecting for this to be kind of a Monster Hunter game, you're going to be sorely disappointed. And I have to say that now that we've had it in our hands for a little while, I say that I stand on the same place. I do also want to clarify as well that I do not think that this is going to dethrone Monster Hunter at all. We've had lots of challengers to try to take the position of the king of hunting games, Monster Hunter, and no one has been able to. Wild Hearts, I can tell you that much, that back in the day did quench my thirst a little bit, did scratch that itch that I had for a new Monster Hunting game. And now with the announcement for the new Monster Hunter in 2025, that quench, that thirst, that itchiness, it got relinked once again. It was kindled again. It was rekindled again. And I am happy to say that me, at least personally, I think that this is going to be, then again, not going to dethrone, not going to be the master of the Monster Hunters, but I think that this is going to quench that thirst, that is going to satisfy that itchiness that we've had for a Monster Hunter game. Now then again, I do want to mention, like I said, that this game was, I perceived it as a mixture between of an MMO and also of a Monster Hunter game. I've read some comments online as well on the Steam forums and discussion of people saying that there is just nothing too special about this game, that it just feels too simplistic on the command system, that it feels too generic, that all you have to do is just mash some regular basic attack buttons and then use your cooldowns whenever you have the cooldowns available. And yes, to some extent it could be that the case. Before we actually get into the discussion of why do I think that this is going to be a perfect satisfier for a Monster Hunter thirst, a Monster Hunter itch, let's define what a MMO would feel, at least in the surface when it comes to the combat system, because I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with MMOs. As a matter of fact, I enjoy them myself quite a lot, but there is a very specific signature or staple that they have that define them. And one of them is just being able to, as you level up, as you make your character stronger, the combat system overall, when it comes to dungeons, when it comes to instances, when it comes to raids, when it comes to skirmishes, it all comes down on how effective your DPS could be depending on the rotation of the skills and the cooldowns that you have. A very signature staple for a MMO also would be the usage of macros. And for people that is not familiar with macros, it's just basically a mod or something else foreign from the engine of the game itself, that it's not a cheat, but it allows people to basically press one button, and that button is going to have a series of algorithms that is going to trigger for several skills to be activated just by pressing one single button. And that is something very specific of a MMO that maximizes your DPS, because it maximizes the amount of inputs that you have to be placing in there for you to use to increase your DPS. Now on the surface, you do have basic attacks on Granblue Fantasy Relink, and you also have your cooldowns. The main difference is that the cooldowns in here, it's just 4 of them. And I know if I can tell you that much, when I began playing this game, I also had the same mindsets. When I began playing this game, I thought to myself that I was just going to be using basic attacks and then use my regular cooldown attacks whenever I had them available, and that is something that I began doing it. But as soon as I tried the different things that the game has to offer to you, as soon as I tried different characters, I understood that there's a different layer of skill ceiling and mastering a character depending on what they have available, because of how the combat system works. So each of all of those individual characters is going to be different. And I want to compare this because, of course, I want to compare this thing to, for example, Monster Hunter. I'm not going to say that the skill ceiling of mastering a weapon is the very same skill ceiling that you are going to have in Granblue Fantasy of mastering a character, but it's something close to it. And as a matter of fact, you are going to immediately see some resemblances on the characters that you have in Granblue Fantasy Relink when it comes to, for example, Lancelot, which is the one that I think that it is going to be one of the most overpowered and broken characters because of how they work on the game. Lancelot is just basically the dual blades from Monster Hunter, a more simplified version of the dual blades. All of the weapons that you have in Monster Hunter, they have different skills and movesets and combos and things that you can trigger depending on how you're playing them. And to some extent, it might not seem at first glance to be the case in here, because you have just your basic attacks that you should be mashing, like a lot of people is doing, like I did myself when I began playing the game. Then you have your special attack that you can combo, and then you have your cooldowns that you would use whenever you have them available. But I can promise you that much: if you actually open your minds and you enter the game into the game with a different mindset, I can promise you that the skeleton of each one of those characters, of each one of those warriors, it is going to feel different, and it has that very same staple of mastering a skill ceiling. I can pretty much say that there's going to be guides, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to be in my very own guides for each and every single one of those characters, and how to maximize them to their fullest potential for them to be as deadly as they can be. And by that I mean is that they have their very specific skeleton of different things that they can accomplish by being that character, even if they are DPS, they are a tank, or they are a support kind of character. Let me give you the example of Lancelot. Lancelot is a character that deals massive amounts of DPS while also being able to use iframes with those special attacks. And those cooldowns, whenever we make that guide, I do not want to take that much of your time in this video focusing on one specific single character, because I promise you it's going to take quite a lot. Each one of those characters has a learning curve. Those skills, you do not want to spam them as soon as you have them available. It is of course something that you can do, but if you want to reach the maximum potential and DPS of that character, you are going to have to synergize all of those skills and all of those cooldowns with the basic attacks and the basic skeleton of the character. So like I said, for example, Lancelot is a character that deals quite a lot of damage by doing the combo chain attacks and also chaining the special skills to provide you with iframes. And that is basically the most thing that you have with Lancelot. He has lots of iframes, and you can use them to get your advantage to keep dealing damage and not be stunned, and also not having to get away from the red area of attacks, big attacks of the enemy that the enemy has, that the bosses have, because you can dodge them with Lancelot. Opposite to, for example, Siegfried, which he would instead be able to deal massive, tremendous amounts of DPS, but he has to be a little bit more alert than Lancelot, because Lancelot can dodge attacks. This guy would need to be using hyper armor, and this hyper armor you have to be mindful about when you use it and how to use it, because not only does it increases your damage, but it also keeps you on the launch of the assault of the attack. And there would also be, like for example, the horn on Monster Hunter. There are specific certain characters in here that provide support, that depending on the inputs of their basic and regular special attacks, and how you time them and how you use them and how you read the moveset and the skeleton of the bosses, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but you could provide much more DPS and support to your party, similar to the hunting horn from Monster Hunter, if you're properly using your inputs and properly using the special stats and skills and imbuements and buffs that each one of those characters has. So like I said, the weapon ceiling or skill ceiling that each one of those characters is going to have, it is not as great, it is not as deep as you would have in Monster Hunter, but it is still there. It is still something that is available. That is why I see this still, I perceive this still to be a mixture between an MMO and a monster hunting game. And the final thing that I think that that resembles the most about a monster hunting game is the fact that you also have to learn the patterns of an enemy boss to be able to perform well and deal enough amount of DPS and be the MVP of your crew whenever you are fighting him. And one thing that I love about it is that not only does the enemy has a skeleton, something very similar, it just clicked to me when it happened. Something very similar happened to when I was playing Monster Hunter and likes games, is that whenever you're using a new weapon, you think that only because you have mastered, you have learned the weapon skills of that weapon, and also just because you have learned the attack animations and the skeleton of some boss that specifically has those movesets and those attacks and those iframes whenever to dodge them, you might think, I'm good, I can fight against this guy. No, you have to change your mindset if you actually want to use a character properly. Let's say, for example, then again, when I was fighting as Gran, which is kind of the main character of the game, I felt comfortable with Gran fighting against a boss, and I felt comfortable because I learned how to use my skills, when to use them, my cooldowns, how would they synergize with the specific weapon that Gran uses, but I also learned to master the attack animations and the skeleton of the boss that I was fighting. And then I tried a new character, and I said to myself, well, I already know how does this enemy boss fights. This is going to be a little bit easier, but no, it's so much different because now you have different inputs. Those characters have different things that are triggered depending on different scenarios, like for example, then again, the hyper armor. You need to know when to trigger that hyper armor if you know the skeleton of the boss. You have to know when to use that iframes on those very specific characters, depending on how are you going to be fighting against that battlefield, against that boss fight, against that monster. So you do not only need to learn the monster, you also need to learn the character, and I think that that's something very Monster Hunter-ish. And that is not to say, not to mention all the endgame content that we have in that game. That is a subject for another video. But for now, let me know what do you think in the comment section down below. Are you excited about Granblue Fantasy Relink? What do you think about all of the things that we have discussed here in this video? Remember to like the video, it really helps like you have no idea. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and join the Discord. We're probably going to be playing lots and lots and lots of Granblue Fantasy in my Discord, making builds and having just a whole ton of fun in there. Remember, no one told you today, you're a gorgeous and beautiful person. You're indeed a gorgeous and beautiful, beautiful person. I will be seeing you goddamn gorgeous and beautiful people in the next one. Have a lovely, lovely day and goodbye.